The day my daughter-in-law told me I was too old to have opinions about my own house. I knew I had to disappear, but not the way she expected. I disappeared from being their convenient doormat, and reappeared as the property owner who held all the cards they thought they were playing. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you think about family boundaries. Have you ever had to stand up to relatives who took advantage of you? I would love to hear your stories too. My name is Margaret Chen, but everyone calls me Maggie. At 72, I thought I would seen every kind of heartbreak life could offer. I would buried my husband of 45 years, just 18 months ago. Survived raising 3 children mostly on my own, while Robert worked double shifts at the factory, and weathered financial storms that would have broken weaker families. What I hadn't prepared for was the particular kind of cruelty that comes wrapped in the language of love and concern. It started innocently enough. After Robert's funeral, my son David began visiting more frequently. Always with his wife Karen in tow, they would sit in my living room, the same room where I would rocked David to sleep as a baby, and speak in hushed, concerned tones about my living situation. "Mom, this house is so big for just you," David would say, glancing around at the 4-bedroom colonial that Robert and I had bought when the kids were small. "All these stairs. And what if something happens? What if you fall, and no one's here to help?" Karen would nod sympathetically, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a cup of the coffee I would served her. "We just worry about you, Maggie. Being all alone out here in the suburbs, it is not safe for a woman your age." At first, I was touched by their concern. After months of rattling around the empty house, listening to every creak and settling board echo through rooms that had once buzzed with family life, the idea of company seemed appealing. When they suggested moving in temporarily to help me adjust, to make sure I was taking care of myself properly, I said yes. That was my first mistake. The moving truck arrived on a Tuesday morning in March. I watched from my front window as David and Karen directed the movers, boxes and furniture, flowing into my house like a flood I hadn't quite prepared for. Karen swept past me in the hallway, arms full of her designer clothes, barely acknowledging my presence. "We will take the master bedroom," she announced, not asked. "You will be more comfortable in the smaller room anyway. Less to clean, easier to manage." I stood there, speechless, watching strangers carry my belongings out of the bedroom I would shared with Robert for 30 years, the room where he would died peacefully in his sleep, where I would held his hand and whispered my final goodbyes. But Karen was already directing traffic, transforming my sanctuary into her domain, with ruthless efficiency. "Mom, it makes sense," David said, noticing my stunned expression. "The master has its own bathroom. Karen needs space for all her work stuff, and you don't really need all that room anymore." Their 16-year-old son Tyler moved into what had been my sewing room, my quiet retreat where I would spend countless hours creating quilts for church auctions and baby blankets for new grandchildren. My sewing machine was relegated to a corner of the basement, buried behind boxes of Karen's summer clothes and David's golf equipment. The changes came in waves, each one presented as logical, helpful, necessary. The thermostat was moved to a locked housing because Karen ran hot and didn't want me wasting money by turning up the heat. My cable package was downgraded because at your age, Mom, you don't need all those channels. The weekly cleaning lady I would employed for years was dismissed because Karen said she could handle the housework better and cheaper. Within a month, I felt like a guest in my own home, a guest who wasn't particularly welcome. The morning I found Karen throwing away my spice collection was the moment I started to understand what was really happening. I would been out getting groceries, walking the 6 blocks to the store, because Karen had decided I shouldn't drive anymore for safety reasons, even though my vision was perfect, and I would never had so much as a fender bender in 50 years of driving. I came home to find my kitchen cabinets stripped bare, decades worth of carefully curated spices and seasonings dumped into garbage bags. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharper than I would intended. Karen didn't even look up from the cabinet she was reorganizing. "Spring cleaning. Half this stuff was expired anyway. I cook differently than you do, Maggie." Simpler, healthier. You don't need all this clutter. I picked up one of the bags, seeing the little jars of cardamom and star anise that I would use to make Robert's favorite Christmas cookies. The saffron I would been saving for a special occasion that would now never come. These aren't expired. I just bought the cumin last month. Well, I don't use cumin. Karen's tone was final, dismissive. I am trying to create a more organized, efficient kitchen. You should be grateful I am willing to do all this work. Grateful, I was supposed to be grateful that someone was systematically erasing my presence from my own home. I would like to keep some of these, I said quietly, pulling out a few jars. Karen sighed dramatically. Maggie, this is exactly what David and I were worried about. You are too attached to things. It is not healthy for someone your age to be hoarding expired food. We are trying to help you live a cleaner, simpler life. I stared at her. This woman who had married my son 15 years ago and had somehow appointed herself the authority on what was appropriate for my age. My life, my kitchen. The worst part was how she said it all with such practiced concern, as if she truly believed she was doing me a favor. That evening at dinner, seated at my own dining room table that now bore Karen's hideous placemats instead of the lace runners I would inherited from my mother, I tried to talk to David about what had happened. Karen threw away all my spices today, I said, keeping my voice level. David barely looked up from his phone. Mom, she is just trying to help. You know how you get about throwing things away. Remember when we cleaned out the garage and you wanted to keep those paint cans from 1987? This is different, David. These were ingredients I use for cooking. Karen set down her fork with an exaggerated sigh. Maggie, I understand, change is hard, but you have to trust that we know what is best. David and I have been talking, and we think it might be time to consider some other changes too. Maybe it is time to think about getting rid of some of your friends who keep encouraging you to resist our help. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What do you mean? Well, like Mrs. Patterson next door. She keeps filling your head with ideas about maintaining independence, when what you need is family support. And that card group you go to on Thursdays, a bunch of gossipy old women who don't understand your situation. My Thursday card group had been my lifeline since Robert died. 5 women I would known for over 2 decades who let me cry when I needed to cry and laugh when I was ready to laugh again. Mrs. Patterson had been my neighbor for 15 years, the one who had brought casseroles after the funeral and checked on me during the worst winter storms. Those are my friends, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Of course they are, Karen said, in that condescending tone that made my skin crawl. But friends can sometimes give bad advice. They don't live with you day to day. They don't see how much help you really need. David nodded in agreement. Mom, we are not saying you cannot see your friends. We are just saying maybe it is time to be more selective about outside influences. We are your family. We are the ones who really care about your well-being. I excused myself early that night, climbing the stairs to the small back bedroom that had once been my daughter, Lisa's room, now decorated with my furniture, but somehow feeling nothing like home. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at Mrs. Patterson's house, the warm light glowing in her kitchen window. For the first time since they would moved in, I allowed myself to admit the truth. This wasn't help. This was a takeover. The revelation didn't come all at once. It accumulated like snow, one small humiliation at a time, until suddenly I was buried under the weight of it all. There was the morning I woke up to find Karen had donated my books to charity without asking. You cannot possibly read all these anymore, she explained, when I discovered the empty shelves, and your eyesight isn't what it used to be. I kept a few large print novels, that should be plenty. She would kept 5 books out of a collection of over 300 that I would spent a lifetime building, books that had been my companions through sleepless nights when the children were small. My escape during the lonely years when Robert worked overtime to pay for college tuitions. My solace in the months after his death. There was the day she intercepted my mail and announced that she would take over managing my finances. Someone needs to make sure the bills get paid on time, she said, waving my social security check, like it was evidence of my incompetence. At your age, it is easy to get confused about dates and amounts. I hadn't been confused about anything. I would been managing a household budget successfully for 50 years. But suddenly, every purchase I made was scrutinized, questioned, criticized. A new pair of shoes became wasteful spending on vanity. Groceries I preferred were too expensive when store brand works just fine. The small monthly donation I would been making to the animal shelter was throwing money away on stray cats when you should be saving for medical expenses. The cruelest cut came when she began monitoring my phone calls. I discovered this accidentally when I called my daughter Lisa in Portland, and Karen picked up the extension in the kitchen. "Is this really a good time for a long-distance call, Maggie?" Karen interrupted our conversation. "These calls are getting expensive. And Lisa, your mother has been a little emotional lately. I am not sure she is giving you an accurate picture of how well she is adjusting." After Lisa hung up, confused and concerned, Karen cornered me in the living room. "Maggie, I think we need to talk about boundaries. You are worrying the other children unnecessarily. Lisa doesn't need to hear every little complaint you have about perfectly normal caregiving arrangements." I wasn't complaining, I said, though even as I said it, I realized I had been. I would been telling Lisa about feeling displaced, about missing my independence, about the strange sensation of being a stranger in my own home. "Honey, I know you don't mean to, but when you are unhappy about changes, it comes across as criticism of David and me. We have given up our own home to come take care of you. The least you could do is try to present a united front to the family." That phrase haunted me for days. Present a united front, as if I were a child who needed to be managed, whose natural responses to losing her autonomy were embarrassing inconveniences that reflected poorly on her caregivers. The worst part was how cleverly they framed everything. When I protested, I was being unreasonable. When I asked questions, I was being paranoid. When I expressed any unhappiness, I was being ungrateful. They had an answer for everything, and every answer made me the problem. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was being too rigid about change. Maybe I was being selfish about sharing my space. Maybe at 72, I really did need this level of supervision and care. The doubt lasted until the afternoon. I overheard Karen talking on the phone in my former bedroom. I would been in the basement, searching through boxes for my mother's china tea set, when her voice drifted down through the heating vents. The conversation was clearly personal, intimate, and I should have announced my presence or moved away. Instead, something in her tone made me freeze and listen. "No, she is not that bad yet," Karen was saying. "I mean, she is definitely declining, more forgetful, more stubborn, but she is not like nursing home bad, which is perfect for us." A pause. "Well, think about it. We are living mortgage-free in a house worth at least $400,000. I have got complete control over her finances, so we are basically being paid to live here through her Social Security and savings. And David's name is already on the deed as joint owner. So when she goes, the house transfers automatically. No probate, no hassle." Another pause, longer this time. "Of course, she doesn't know about the deed change. David handled all that paperwork when she was still grief-stricken about Robert. She was signing everything he put in front of her without reading it. The lawyer even commented on how trusting she was. I felt the floor shift beneath me, literally gripped the basement wall to keep from falling. David's name was on my deed. When had that happened? I tried to remember the stack of papers he would brought me to sign in the weeks after Robert's funeral, when every day felt like swimming through fog and I would been grateful for someone else to handle the details. "The beauty of it is, we are not doing anything technically illegal," Karen continued. "She signed everything voluntarily. We are providing care. She is getting proper supervision. Everyone's needs are being met. It is just a matter of waiting it out and making sure she doesn't do anything stupid in the meantime. Waiting it out. Waiting for me to die." I made it up the basement stairs on shaking legs. my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give out right there and save them the trouble of waiting. In my small bedroom, I sat heavily on the bed and tried to process what I would just learned. My son had legally maneuvered himself into ownership of my home. My daughter-in-law was systematically isolating me from my support system while taking control of my finances. And they were both counting down the days until I was gone. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal, though that cut deep enough to steal my breath. The worst part was how stupid I felt, how completely I would been played by my own desperate need for family, for connection, for someone to care about whether I lived or died. But as I sat there in the growing darkness, something else began to emerge from the shock and hurt. Something harder and more focused than grief, anger. They thought they would found the perfect victim. A lonely, grieving widow who would be too grateful for attention to ask inconvenient questions, too afraid of abandonment to fight back, too old and confused to protect herself. They would made one critical error in their calculations. I wasn't confused, I wasn't helpless, and I certainly wasn't dead yet. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Every conversation, every change, every small cruelty suddenly made perfect sense when viewed through the lens of what I now knew. They weren't caring for me, they were warehousing me until I expired, and they could claim their prize. The next morning, I began my research. I waited until David left for work, and Karen left for her yoga class, then made my way to David's old room, which had become their home office. I would never snooped through my children's belongings, even when they were teenagers, but desperate times called for desperate measures. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Karen was meticulous about record keeping, and she would kept copies of everything in a neat file labeled M. Chen. Legal documents. My hands shook as I pulled out papers I would never seen before, documents that had apparently been signed with my name, but without my understanding. The deed transfer was there, dated just 6 weeks after Robert's funeral. My signature looked shaky, uncertain, nothing like my usual strong handwriting. I remembered that day vaguely, David bringing me papers while I was still in my bathrobe, crying over a cup of coffee I couldn't finish. He would said something about protecting the house from estate taxes, making sure everything was simplified for when the time came. I would trusted him completely. There were other documents too, a power of attorney that gave David control over my medical decisions, a financial power of attorney that allowed Karen to manage my bank accounts, even a living will that specified no extraordinary measures to prolong life, nothing that would burden the family with difficult decisions. They would been thorough. I had to give them that. Every possible scenario had been planned for, every legal avenue secured. On paper, it looked like responsible estate planning. In reality, it was a complete transfer of control over my life and death. But as I read through the documents more carefully, I noticed something that made my heart skip. The deed transfer had been recorded incorrectly. In their haste to secure ownership, they would made a crucial error. David's name had been added as joint tenant with right of survivorship. Yes, but the original deed had never been properly updated to reflect his legal authority to make that change. I was no lawyer, but I would been married to a man who had worked in real estate for 20 years before the factory job. I knew enough about property law to recognize a flawed filing when I saw one, and this one was flawed enough that a good attorney might be able to challenge it. More importantly, as I dug deeper into Karen's files, I discovered they would been using my accounts to pay for far more than household expenses. David's credit card debt, Karen's shopping sprees, Tyler's expensive electronics, even a family vacation to Hawaii last month that I would know nothing about. They would been treating my savings like their personal ATM. By the time I heard Karen's car in the driveway, I would photographed everything with my phone and returned the files to their exact positions. I made it back to my room, just as the front door opened, my heart hammering, but my mind crystal clear. I had evidence. I had ammunition. And for the first time since they would moved in, I had hope. The hardest part was pretending nothing had changed. For 3 days, I played the role of the confused, grateful elderly woman they expected me to be. I let Karen dictate my meals, agreed when David suggested I was too tired for my Thursday card game, and smiled weakly when they discussed my limitations, as if I wasn't sitting right there. But inside, I was planning. On Thursday morning, while they thought I was napping, I walked the 6 blocks to downtown, not to the grocery store, as I would told them, but to the law offices of Stevens, Martinez and Associates, the firm that had handled Robert's will. Mr. Stevens was younger than I would expected, maybe David's age, with kind eyes and a patient manner that reminded me why Robert had trusted his father's firm with our legal needs. He listened without interruption as I explained my situation, occasionally taking notes, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "Mrs. Chen," he said finally, "I am going to be very direct with you. If what you are describing is accurate, you are the victim of what we call elder financial abuse. It is more common than people realize, and unfortunately, family members are often the perpetrators." He spread the photographs I would taken across his desk, studying them carefully. "This deed transfer is definitely problematic. Your son didn't have legal authority to add himself as joint owner without proper documentation of your intent and capacity at the time of signing. And these financial transactions," he shook his head, "using your accounts for personal expenses without your knowledge or consent is outright theft." I felt a mixture of relief and sadness wash over me. Relief that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts had been correct. Sadness that it had come to this, that my own child had stolen from me. "What can I do?" I asked. Mr. Stevens leaned back in his chair. "Several things. First, we can challenge the deed transfer based on the flawed paperwork and the circumstances under which it was signed. Second, we can revoke the powers of attorney immediately. Those documents give them legal control they shouldn't have. Third, we can pursue recovery of the funds they have taken without authorization." He paused, studying my face carefully. "But Mrs. Chen, I have to warn you. This will likely destroy your relationship with your son and his family. Once we take legal action, there is no going back. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about the woman I would been 6 months ago, desperate for family connection, willing to sacrifice anything to avoid being alone. Then I thought about the woman I would become in the last week, cataloging their lies and manipulation, realizing how completely they would been willing to erase me. "Mr. Stevens," I said, "they already destroyed our relationship. I am just making it official." He smiled grimly. "In that case, let's get started." The first step was securing new housing. Mr. Stevens recommended a real estate agent who specialized in helping seniors, and by the end of the week, I would put a deposit down on a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment in a community designed for active adults. It had a garden view, a full kitchen, and most importantly, a security system that only I would control. The second step was financial protection. We opened new bank accounts at a different institution and began the process of transferring my assets away from the accounts Karen had been accessing. It was more complicated than I would expected. They would entangled our finances so thoroughly that untangling them required forensic accounting. But Mr. Stevens assured me it could be done. The third step was the hardest, telling them I was leaving. I chose a Sunday morning when Tyler was at a friend's house. I didn't want him to witness what was about to happen. David and Karen were drinking coffee in my kitchen, planning their day, discussing whether to drive to the outlet mall or just lounge by the pool they would have installed in my backyard without consulting me. "I need to talk to both of you," I said, settling into the chair that had once been my favorite seat at my own breakfast table. Karen glanced up from her phone with mild annoyance. "What is it, Maggie?" "We are trying to plan our day." "I am moving out," I said simply. The silence that followed was profound. David's coffee mug stopped halfway to his mouth. Karen's fingers froze over her phone screen. "What did you say?" David asked slowly. "I am moving out. I have found an apartment, and I will be leaving at the end of the month." Karen recovered first, her voice taking on that familiar tone of condescending concern. "Maggie, honey, we have talked about this. You cannot live alone. You need supervision, support." This house is your home. No, I said calmly. This house was my home. Now it is your house, and I am done being a guest in my own life. David set down his mug with a sharp click. Mom, you are being ridiculous. We gave up our apartment to take care of you. We have restructured our entire lives around your needs. My needs, I laughed, a sound that surprised even me with its bitterness. David, when exactly did you ask me what my needs were? Because I seem to remember you telling me what my needs were and then charging me for the privilege. Karen's eyes narrowed. I don't know what you think you are implying, but I am not implying anything. I interrupted. I am stating facts. You have been using my money to pay your bills. You have isolated me from my friends. You have taken over my home and my finances, and you have made me feel like a burden in my own life. That ends now. David's face was turning red, a sure sign that his temper was rising. After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us. By making wild accusations and threatening to abandon the family. I am not abandoning anyone, David. I am reclaiming my independence, something I should have done months ago. You cannot do this, Karen said, her voice sharp now. The fake sweetness finally dropping away. You signed papers, legal documents. You cannot just pretend they don't exist. I smiled, and I could tell from their expressions that it wasn't a particularly pleasant smile. You are right, Karen. I did sign papers, and you are also right that legal documents exist. But here is what you apparently didn't know. Some of those papers were signed under duress, some were filed incorrectly, and some represent financial abuse of an elderly person. The color drained from both their faces. I have consulted with an attorney, I continued. A very good attorney who specializes in elder abuse cases. He is quite interested in the creative ways you have been managing my finances. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You cannot prove anything. Everything we did was legal. Everything you signed was voluntary. Was it? I asked. Because I remember being in a grief-stricken fog when you brought me those papers to sign. I remember trusting my son to protect my interests, not exploit them. And I definitely don't remember authorizing anyone to use my Social Security money to pay for credit card debt and vacation trips. Karen's hands were shaking now. Maggie, I think you are confused. Maybe we should call your doctor. Have him assess whether you are competent to make these kinds of decisions. It was exactly the response I would expected when caught. They would attack my mental capacity, try to paint me as a confused old woman who couldn't be trusted to understand her own situation. Actually, I saw Dr. Rodriguez yesterday, I said. Had a complete cognitive assessment passed with flying colors. He was quite impressed with my mental acuity for someone my age. He has written a letter to that effect, which my attorney now has on file. I would plan this conversation carefully, anticipated their responses, prepared for their attacks. But I hadn't prepared for the look of pure hatred that crossed Karen's face. You vindictive old bitch, she hissed. We saved you from rotting away in this house alone. We gave you purpose, companionship, care. And this is how you repay us. Karen, David warned, but she was beyond caring about appearances now. No, David, let's be honest about what is happening here. Your mother is having a tantrum because she doesn't like sharing her house. She would rather live alone and miserable than admit she needs help. Fine. Let her go live in some depressing apartment and see how long it takes before she comes crawling back. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 72 years in my joints, but also feeling a strength I hadn't experienced in months. Karen, you are absolutely right about one thing. I would rather live alone than live with people who see me as a meal ticket and a burden. But you are wrong about something else. I will not be coming back. I walked to the doorway, then turned back to face them. You have until the end of the month to find somewhere else to live. After that, this house goes on the market. You cannot sell this house, David said desperately. My name is on the deed. Actually, that is another interesting legal question my attorney is researching. Turns out, Improper deed transfers can be reversed under certain circumstances. Who knew? I left them sitting there in stunned silence and climbed the stairs to my small bedroom. Through the thin walls, I could hear their urgent, angry whispers, but I no longer cared what they were planning or plotting. I was done being afraid of their reactions. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. The next 3 weeks were a strange mixture of liberation and warfare. David and Karen alternated between furious accusations and desperate apologies. Sometimes within the same conversation, they brought Tyler into it, having him beg me not to break up the family. They called my other children, painting me as mentally unstable and cruel. They even enlisted their friends to call and tell me how ungrateful I was being. But I held firm. Every attack only confirmed that I was making the right decision. Mr. Stevens worked quickly to untangle their financial manipulations. The deed transfer was successfully challenged based on improper documentation and evidence of my mental state at the time of signing. The powers of attorney were revoked. Most importantly, we discovered they would take in nearly $40,000 from my accounts over the 6 months they would live with me. We can pursue criminal charges if you want, Mr. Stevens told me during one of our meetings. This is a clear case of financial elder abuse. I considered it. Part of me wanted to see them face consequences for what they would done, but a larger part of me just wanted them out of my life. Can we recover the money without criminal charges? I asked. Most of it. Yes. We can put liens on their assets, garnish wages if necessary. It might take time, but we can get your money back. Then let's do that. I don't want revenge. I just want justice. The day they moved out was gray and drizzly, matching the mood that hung over the house like fog. David barely spoke to me, loading boxes into a rented truck with angry, jerky movements. Karen made a few last attempts at manipulation, tearful speeches about family forgiveness and how I was making a terrible mistake. Tyler, caught in the middle of this adult conflict, he didn't understand, hugged me goodbye with tears in his eyes. "I am sorry, Grandma," he whispered. "I didn't know." That moment almost broke me. Tyler was innocent in all this, a child who had been used as a pawn in his parents' schemes. But I couldn't save him without sacrificing myself, and I would done enough sacrificing. "I love you, Tyler," I whispered back. "That will never change." After the truck pulled away, I stood in my empty house, listening to the silence. It felt different now, not lonely but peaceful. Mine again. I spent the next week cleaning and repairing, erasing the traces of their occupation. I repainted the master bedroom, bought new furniture to replace what they would damaged or claimed. I called my old cleaning lady and asked her to come back. I even bought new spices and spent an afternoon organizing them in my kitchen cabinets. Mrs. Patterson came over with a casserole and a bottle of wine. "I am proud of you," she said simply. That took real courage. We sat in my living room, sipping wine and watching the sunset through windows that were mine to leave uncurtained if I chose. For the first time in months, I felt completely relaxed. "Do you regret it?" Mrs. Patterson asked. I thought about David, about the little boy who used to fall asleep in my lap while I read him stories. I thought about the man he would become, willing to steal from his own mother. I thought about the grandchildren I might not see anymore, the family gatherings that would happen without me. "I regret that it was necessary," I said finally. "But I don't regret doing it." 6 months later, I am settled into my new apartment and building a life that is entirely my own design. I have joined a book club, started volunteering at the library, and reconnected with friends I would lost touch with during those dark months of manipulation and control. David has tried to contact me a few times. Usually, when the wage garnishment hits his paycheck, or when Tyler asks about seeing me. His messages vary between anger and attempts at reconciliation, but they all carry the same underlying tone. He still doesn't understand why I couldn't just accept the situation he would created for me. I don't respond. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. But I am not bitter. Bitterness would give them power over my future, and I have reclaimed that power. I wake up each morning in my sunny apartment, make my coffee exactly the way I like it, and plan my day according to my own wishes and interests. I am 72 years old, living alone, managing my own finances, and making my own decisions. To some people, that might look like a sad ending to the story. To me, it looks like freedom. Yesterday, I got a letter from Tyler. He is 17 now, old enough to understand more about what happened. He wrote that he misses me, that he has learned to see things differently as he has gotten older. He asked if we could meet for coffee sometime. Just the two of us. I wrote back yes, immediately. Some relationships can survive the worst betrayals. Others cannot. The key is knowing the difference and having the courage to act on that knowledge. I spent too many years believing that family love meant accepting whatever treatment was offered, that blood relations came with obligations that superseded my own well-being. I have learned that real love requires respect, and respect requires boundaries. I am not dead to anyone anymore. I am very much alive, living exactly the life I choose to live. And that, it turns out, is the best revenge of all. What do you think about my story? Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who took advantage of your generosity or kindness? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places and never giving up on yourself, no matter what age you are. Sometimes the most important stand you will ever take is the one you take for yourself.